Hi there, this is Abel James, and welcome to the Fat Burning Man Show. Ladies and gentlemen, today we'll be hanging out with one of my favorite authors, podcasters, and Jiu-Jitsu masters, Mr. Robb Wolf. Now, Robb is the author of the Paleo Solution, a former research biochemist, a sought-after strength and conditioning coach, and a leading expert in Paleolithic nutrition. And through his best-selling book, top-ranked iTunes podcast, and wildly popular seminar series, Robb has transformed the lives of tens of thousands of people around the world. But Robb hasn't always been a knuckle-dragger, and we'll talk today a little bit about his interesting backstory that has a lot of parallels with mine. So as you may know, Robb hosts the Paleo Solution podcast, which is one of my favorites. And we've both been muscling for the top spot and nipping at the heels of Jillian Michaels for the past few weeks. And awesome news, the Fat Burning Man Show just hit number 2 in the UK and even nudged out Jillian Michaels. And last time I checked, it was ranked at least in the top 10 in most English-speaking countries on the iTunes charts. And this is crazy. You know, this is unprecedented stuff. No corporation, no sponsors, no PR or massive marketing campaigns. Robb and I are just a couple of dudes with microphones who are passionate about helping as many people as we can. And with our powers combined and all the other ancestral health podcasts out there, we're giving conventional wisdom a walloping. So I know I speak for Robb and all of the other paleo podcasters out there when I say that we are very humbled and truly appreciate your support. And if you haven't already, it really helps us, skyrocket in the rankings and get after the conventional wisdom folks when you leave a review on iTunes. So if you have a minute and you haven't already, please hop on over to iTunes and leave us a review. We really appreciate it. I also wanted to give you an update that the format of the Fat Burning Man Show is evolving. I plan to have many of my guests back to answer your questions, explore heady and cutting-edge principles and theories, and chat about generally changing the world. So this will certainly not be the last time you'll see Robb on the show. We had a blast. On today's show, we talk about how Art Devaney kicked Robb's butt in an impromptu road race, why extreme caloric restriction for longevity is not worth the misery, and Robb's view on intermittent fasting as a stressor, whether or not there's such thing as safe starches, and of course Robb's opinions about the hot topic, cold thermogenesis Jack Kruse style. Cool, let's go hang out with Robb. We're here with Robb Wolf, paleo rock star and jiu-jitsu extraordinaire. How's it going, Robb?
Good. Abel knows that I just got the dog piss beat out of me for about 3 hours at JIT, so he's pulling all of your legs. Like I just had my neck cranked and pulled and everything. So I'm good, man. How are you doing? You did a little fasting today, huh?
I did. I find that I get a heck of a lot of work done when I fast for the most part, and then sometimes I just run out of juice, and that's kind of what happened today. I just cranked it all day, and then it was time to eat, and man, I was ready. It's
kind of a good way to do things, though. Like I find that interval working, interval training. I mean, it's like you can get in and you can get a pretty good focus going for about 3 to 4 hours, and then things start getting a little dodgy at the edge of that, and like really having an expectation of like 8 hours of productivity if it's kind of writing and cerebral work, it's tough. You know, it's might be a different thing if you're building a house and you're tinkering with something you're building, but I find any type of cerebral work, writing, it's about 3, maybe 5 hours, and then I'm tapped. I'm done. Yeah,
glucose heavy stuff for sure.
Yeah.
So things are pretty crazy on that side of the microphone. You got a wolf cub on the way, I hear.
That's what I've been informed of. It was a big surprise like a week ago. Yeah. No, we're close. Today is April 17, and we're due April 26. And honestly, like Nikki could go anytime, but both of us have a little gut sense it's probably going to go a little long, just because. Really? She's feeling fully ready to go now, and I wouldn't say miserable, but she's getting uncomfortable. She's getting a little uncomfortable. So yeah, man, we'll see. That's going to be a game changer. To whatever degree I'm perky is probably going to disappear. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, you must be stoked and shaking in your bones at the same time, right?
Yeah, I keep saying alternating bouts of fear and excitement, which. Everybody who's actually a parent, they're like, yeah, that's good. That shows that you're pretty sane with the whole thing. So yeah.
Oh, I'm sure you'll be great.
I hope so, man. I hope so. I've kept the cat alive for like 10 years, so I'm hoping that that somehow scales to kids.
Yeah, the Paleo Kitty, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. So I just revisited your book a few weeks ago, and I'd forgotten that you were once a self-righteous vegetarian for some time too, and I was in the past as well. Can you tell folks a bit about your backstory and going from essentially being sick to leading the paleo movement?
I think it's kind of an interesting story in self-experimentation. A little bit out of the Tim Ferriss camp. I was a former state champion powerlifter. I was into kickboxing. I've always been interested in nutrition and health. My parents were very, very sick growing up, and I just had a niggling suspicion that I didn't, that diabetes and heart disease and mental illness was not a guarantee for me, and I just was always interested in tinkering with my food. And around 1992, I graduated high school in 90. And in 92, the food pyramid was kind of unleashed. Mm-hmm. And, it was very high carb, low fat. The media was definitely beating this kind of vegetarian-esque drum. Like I think that drumbeat has gotten heavier and heavier as time has gone on, interestingly. But yeah. Having a little bit of a counterculture streak, having an interest in improving my performance, health, and longevity, I tried eating a high-carb, low-fat vegetarian diet, which then kind of grew into a vegan diet. And what was interesting was that I was still, attempting to maintain a powerlifting schedule. I was still trying to do kickboxing and capoeira. So the only change to the system really was the fueling that I was using. And it didn't make sense to me that I would need to use like brown rice protein powder or, these protein concentrates that I see a lot of vegan athletes use today. Mm-hmm. What made sense to me was that I should eat whole, unprocessed foods. Yeah. And so I started eating lots of grains and lots of legumes. I had a pressure cooker. I had sprouters. I went to the Georgia Shawa Macrobiotic Institute and studied there. I followed all the stuff from like John McDougall and Dean Ornish. And I got sick. I lost muscle mass. I went from about 185 pounds, sub 10% body fat, almost a 600-pound back squat, 600-pound, 565 squat, 565 deadlift, 345 bench. I could stand flat-footed under a basketball hoop and dump a basketball with no run-up. Actually, I think I'm uncoordinated enough that a run-up probably wouldn't have helped me, but, I was a reasonably strong, powerful individual, and I was good at kickboxing. And over the course of about 2.5 years, I lost over 40 pounds of muscle mass, got to a point where I couldn't even bench press my body weight, which was then about 140 pounds. And I had ulcerative colitis so bad that the doctors wanted to do a bowel resection on me. Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is at the ripe old age of like 26, 27. Yeah. And the doctors that I was going to, I was in Seattle at this time, with very alternative medicine, very pro-vegetarian. Mm-hmm. It was their opinion that this way of eating was the only thing that was keeping me alive. This high carb, low fat, vegetarian, vegan diet. Given the fact that my parents were both type 2 diabetic and had heart disease and everything, it was like it was their opinion that I was a confluence of their very shallow end of the gene pool genetics. And I was basically seriously chingad at that point. And, I had nothing really to do other than just try to ride this thing out and have a bowel resection. And, it was my opinion at that time that I probably wasn't going to live all that long. Yeah. And then my mother, we discovered, had an intolerance to, she had celiac disease, which, gluten intolerance. She was also intolerant and autoimmune reactive to various legumes and also to dairy. And we discovered this when she had an autoimmune flare. And when I was talking to my mom, she almost died from this whole process. And then I was talking to my mom, and she was describing what her rheumatologist recommended that she needed to eat, which was, no grains, no legumes, no dairy, basically. And I was like, God, no grains, no legumes, no dairy. What the heck would you eat if you don't eat that? Yeah. And it was weird, this kind of like stream of consciousness thing. And I was thinking grains and legumes, agriculture, what do you eat before agriculture? And then it just popped into my head, paleo diet, and I had heard this term. This is back around like 1998. Mm-hmm. And I had heard this term before, and it was this idea that if you ate more akin to your, Paleolithic ancestors, that there might be some health benefits to that. And so I used this new search engine called Google, and lo and behold, there was some information from these guys, Art Devaney and Lauren Cordain. Not a ton of information like there is now, but there was some information, and it talked a ton about grains causing gastrointestinal damage, metabolic derangement due changes in carbohydrate load and decreases in protein, and basically just a evolutionary mismatch between our genetics and our environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally, I was like, well, what the heck have I got to lose? And I went and bought a bunch of like grass-fed beef ribs at Whole Foods, cooked them up, had a salad, and literally had the best night's sleep that I had had in a couple of years. And the following day I had like scrambled eggs and fruit, and that's almost 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And this whole thing grew out of that. And I was very fortunate at the time that the place that I was working, I was doing some lipid metabolism research related to autoimmunity and cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was kind of able to steer the boat of my research kind of in this paleo diet direction. I ended up doing a research fellowship with Lauren Cordain for about 9 months out in Fort Collins. And then, started the gym in Chico and
right.
blog and the podcast and did the book and all the rest of that. But that's all been an outgrowth of having been really sick, getting healthy, becoming a coach, talking to people about this stuff, kind of keeping my finger in the research circles and all that. And that's kind of the Cliff Notes, 30,000 foot treatment of, how I went from that spot to this spot.
Yeah, awesome. And it's definitely blown up in the past few years for sure.
It's insane.
And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. So paleo has, evolved, so to speak, over the past few years, and it seems that it's far more nuanced in terms of what qualifies as paleo, especially in recent years. But you worked with Cordain way back, like you said. So what do you think about how paleo has kind of recalibrated over the years?
It's interesting. It's good. In the early days, Lauren was of the opinion that, saturated fat posed a significant, cardiovascular risk parameter. And I think coming as a lipid biochemist background, it never really made sense to me unless we had other really overt systemic inflammatory issues. And so this is one of the things that, over the course of time that stuff is rattled out. We understand, one of the big awakenings for me, I was always of the opinion that everybody would benefit from a low carb paleo approach. I was quite dogmatic about it because I saw so damn many people benefit from it. But, there's selection bias there. You hear more from the people that succeed than fail. I'm usually not that big of a dick, and so I think that when things don't work for people, that they tend not to come back and kind of like neener, this didn't work, and so you create a selection bias with that, and then over the course of time, we've seen that. I still think that starting most people who are metabolically broken have systemic inflammation. Throwing that dart close to that low carb spot is just it's a good common place to start. Is it the orthodoxy? You don't always have to start there, but it's just a safe, easy spot that you can start people, and then we can start tinkering from there. Do you need more carbs? Do you need kind of a GAPS protocol to really heal the gut and you don't deal with starch at all? Or do you in fact do way better with starch? And then we've got kind of a logic tree or a flow chart that we can then start customizing things. And the thing that's interesting to me is that people just get nasty as hell about the nuances when, really it's just a process of discovery. It's nothing to get your panties bunched up about. Some stuff's going to work better for some people than for others. This basic evolutionary template is still more or less the place to start. And if it just flat doesn't work for somebody, then we will discover that over time. I typically don't see that, but there's nothing really to get that worked up about. We've just learned some nuanced pieces to all this over time. And I think that, this new risk assessment program that just popped up in the city of Reno is just kind of a good illustration of just having a base kind of curriculum or kind of philosophy. This is where we start the lion's share of people. If you've got metabolic derangement, we start you with kind of low carb paleo. We get your vitamin D levels up. We battle to get your sleep improved. Try to have some smart exercise, and then we start tinkering and shifting and shuffling from there. And it's based on the feedback that we get from the person. And we can usually get some really good performance out of folks. We have a gal that Amy Kubel's been nutritionally coaching, and I've been helping her also. Her name's Ursula Grobler, and I believe she just made the Olympic team. Like literally,
Wow.
they had a race like an hour ago or something, and
Oh,
she
cool.
was, seated first place. But she set the indoor world record on the 2,000-meter rowing event a couple of years ago, and she took almost a minute off the previous best after she started eating paleo.
That's awesome.
And so. Yeah, which is is totally cool, and we've got a bunch of top level MMA fighters like Forrest Griffin and Frank Mir and other
monsters.
folks in paleo, and so it's just it's a good safe spot to start most folks, and then we can kind of tinker and modify from there and see where we go.
Yeah, maybe you could talk a little bit more about this, and you brought it up at Paleo FX, and I was pleased when you talked about how in your book it starts out recommending lean meats, but can we talk about the fat issue? Because what you said earlier, that seems a little bit over reductive. It's not really the whole story. It's not just lean meats. It's all fat.
Yeah, and the way that or the reason that I wrote the book the way that I did, and I had a couple of folks, I forget her name. She's really cute. God, her name will come to me, but she was like, I wish you would change that in your book. Like, I always have to answer this question, but I wrote lean meats, and also if you notice when you look at the blood work, I have blood work recommendations that are straight out of American AMA recommendations, low cholesterol and all the rest of that stuff. But then I have qualifiers immediately after that. So I recommend lean meats and low cholesterol levels unless you have this, and this happen. And so, I recommend the lean meats up front. But then if you look at the actual meal plan recommendations, it's not lean meats, it's not low fat, and so a little bit of what this is.